Let's dive into space. Number 10. The simulation hypothesis. In 2003, Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom published a paper in the Philosophical Quarterly that began with what seemed like an abstract thought experiment and ended with an argument so airtight it became impossible to dismiss. The question was deceptively simple. If any civilization ever develops the computing power to run detailed simulations of conscious minds, then simulated minds will vastly outnumber real ones. And if that is true, the odds that we are among the real ones are almost vanishingly small. Bostrom's argument is a trilemma. Either all civilizations go extinct before they reach the computational power needed to run such simulations, or advanced civilizations choose not to run them for reasons we cannot predict, or we are almost certainly living inside one right now. Each possibility carries its own disturbing weight, but the third option has attracted the most serious scientific attention. Elon Musk famously put the odds of us living in base reality at roughly 1 in billions. Cosmologist Neil deGrasse Tyson placed the probability at 50-50. What makes this more than a philosophical curiosity is the physical evidence some researchers believe they have found. In 2012, physicist Silas Bean at the University of Bonn published a paper arguing that if the universe is a numerical simulation running on a computational lattice, it would leave a detectable signature in the angular distribution of the highest energy cosmic rays. Those rays would travel preferentially along the axis of the underlying grid, deviating from perfect isotropy in a measurable way. The technology to detect this signature exists right now. Theoretical physicist S. James Gates at the University of Maryland found something even stranger while working on equations of supersymmetry. Buried inside the mathematics, Gates discovered what he described as doubly even self-dual linear binary error-correcting block codes, the same class of codes used to detect and fix errors in computer data transmissions. He had not been looking for them. They were simply there, woven into the structure of the physical laws themselves. Whether this constitutes evidence, coincidence, or a profound misreading of mathematical structure, no one can say with certainty. But the question Bostrom planted in 2003 has never been satisfactorily answered. If the laws of physics are code, and we are beginning to find that code, what would it mean the day we learned to rewrite it? Number 9. The many worlds interpretation. In 1957, a Princeton doctoral student named Hugh Everett III submitted a thesis to his advisor, physicist John Archibald Wheeler, that proposed something Wheeler initially called radical. The title of Everett's shorter published version was modest: Relative State Formulation of Quantum Mechanics, appearing in the July 1957 issue of Reviews of Modern Physics. The idea it contained was anything but modest. Everett proposed that quantum mechanics never actually chooses between outcomes. It plays all of them out simultaneously, splitting reality into parallel branches with every quantum event that occurs. At the time, the accepted framework for understanding quantum mechanics was the Copenhagen interpretation, developed by Niels Bohr and his colleagues in the 1920s. Copenhagen said that quantum superposition, a particle existing in multiple states at once, collapses to a single outcome the moment it is observed. It was a practical framework, and it worked extraordinarily well for making predictions. But it left a disturbing unanswered question about why observation should play any special role in determining physical reality. Everett thought the question revealed a deep flaw in the theory itself. His solution was startling in its simplicity. Nothing ever collapses. Every possible outcome of every quantum event actually occurs, each one branching into its own separate and causally isolated version of reality. The universe is not a single timeline, but an endlessly proliferating tree of parallel worlds, spawned continuously at every moment by every particle interaction in existence. The term many worlds was not Everett's own coinage. Physicist Bryce DeWitt gave it that name when he popularized the theory in the 1970s. a decade after Everett himself had left academia. Today, the many worlds interpretation is taken seriously by a significant number of theoretical physicists, including MIT cosmologist Max Tegmark, who has developed an entire 4-level taxonomy of parallel universes with rigorous mathematical grounding. The interpretation is mathematically consistent with all known quantum data. It requires no special role for observers. It produces no contradictions. The only problem is the one that makes it deeply unsettling. Because every branch is causally disconnected from the others, the existence of parallel worlds may be permanently, fundamentally untestable. The most disturbing aspect of the many worlds theory is not the existence of other versions of you living out different lives in parallel realities. It is the possibility that science may never be able to prove them wrong, leaving us permanently uncertain whether the universe is singular or infinite, simple or incomprehensibly vast. Number 8. The holographic universe principle. In the early 1990s, two physicists working independently arrived at the same extraordinary conclusion through separate lines of reasoning. Gerard et Hooft of Utrecht University in the Netherlands and Leonard Susskind of Stanford University both determined that everything contained within a three-dimensional volume of space, every particle, every field, every event, might be entirely encoded as information on a two-dimensional surface at its boundary. The universe, in other words, might be a hologram. Not metaphorically, literally. The idea had its roots in work done by Stephen Hawking and physicist Jacob Bekenstein in the 1970s on the thermodynamics of black holes. They discovered something deeply counterintuitive. A black hole's information content is proportional not to its volume, as every physical intuition would suggest, but to the area of its surface. The entropy of the entire interior is encoded on a two-dimensional shell. De Hooft and Susskind recognized that if this was true for black holes, it might be true for any bounded region of space, including the observable universe itself. In 1997, Argentine physicist Juan Maldacena published the mathematical realization of this idea in what would become the most cited paper in the history of high-energy physics. His ADS/CFT correspondence demonstrated a precise mathematical equivalence between a theory of quantum gravity in a higher dimensional space and a theory without gravity on its lower dimensional boundary. The two descriptions were identical. In principle, everything that happens in 3 dimensions has a complete twin representation in 2. In 2017, a research team led by cosmologist Niayesh Afshordi analyzed patterns in the cosmic microwave background and reported finding anomalies consistent with holographic predictions, though those results remain contested and far from conclusive. What makes the holographic principle genuinely unsettling is not just its implications for space. It strikes at the nature of depth itself. If the principle is correct, then the three-dimensional world we navigate, the space between objects, the sense of interior and exterior, the very feeling of being located somewhere, is not fundamental. It is emergent. It is a projection arising from information encoded on a surface we cannot directly perceive or locate. If three-dimensional space is a projection, then physics has been describing the shadow on the wall rather than the thing casting it. And somewhere, on a surface we have never seen, the true description of reality may already be written in a language we are only beginning to learn. Number 7. Panspermia, life seeded across the galaxy. In 1984, a geological survey team working in the Allen Hills region of Antarctica pulled a dark, fist-sized rock from the ice. It was cataloged as ALH84001 and stored, largely unremarked, in a NASA collection for more than a decade. Then, in August 1996, a team led by NASA scientist David McKay published a paper in the journal Science that briefly changed the world. The rock, they announced, had originated on Mars, and inside it, they believed they had found the fossilized remains of ancient Martian bacteria. NASA Administrator Dan Golden called the finding potentially one of the most significant announcements in the history of science. President Clinton addressed the nation from the White House. Scientists celebrated and argued simultaneously, as they always do when the stakes are this high. The evidence McKay's team presented included microscopic structures resembling bacterial fossils, chemical compounds associated with biological processes, and mineral formations that, on Earth, are typically produced by living organisms. The scientific community was, and remains, sharply divided on the interpretation of every single one of those findings. But the discovery reignited serious scientific attention to a far older and more radical idea: panspermia, the hypothesis that life does not originate independently on each world, but travels between them, carried inside rocks ejected by asteroid impacts, and protected from radiation by thick mineral shielding during the journey. The modern scientific version of this idea was championed by astronomer Fred Hoyle and astrobiologist Chandra Wickramasinghe, beginning in the 1970s. In 2007, the European Space Agency's Photon M3 mission exposed tardigrades, the toughest known multicellular animals on Earth, to open space. They survived. In 1973, Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA's structure, and Leslie Orgel went even further, proposing directed panspermia, the idea that life on Earth was deliberately seeded by an intelligent civilization elsewhere in the galaxy. If standard panspermia is true, then life on Earth may have begun elsewhere, perhaps in a warm ocean on early Mars, or in the atmosphere of a long-dead world we have never cataloged. Every tree, every animal, every human being would be, in the most literal biological sense, an alien. If panspermia is true, the search for alien life ends the moment we look in a mirror. Number 6. The Big Bounce, the universe, before the Big Bang. The standard model of cosmology describes the beginning of the universe as a singularity, a point of infinite density reached approximately 13.8 billion years ago, where the equations of general relativity break down and physics as we understand it ceases to function. Before the Big Bang, under this model, there was no before. Time itself did not exist. That is the accepted answer, and for decades it was considered the only physically coherent one. A growing body of theoretical work now suggests it may be wrong. Loop quantum cosmology, a field that originated with physicist Martin Bojewald at Pennsylvania State University around 1999, applies the principles of loop quantum gravity to the very early universe. What it finds is that the singularity is not a beginning, but a transition point. When matter is compressed to extreme densities, quantum gravitational effects become so powerful that gravity itself becomes repulsive rather than attractive. Instead of collapsing into a singularity, the universe rebounds. A big bounce that gives birth to an expanding universe from the wreckage of a contracting one. In February 2006, Abhay Ashtekar, Tomasz Pawlowski, and Parampreet Singh at Penn State provided the first rigorous mathematical demonstration of this bounce in the equations of loop quantum cosmology. In 2001 and 2002, physicists Paul Steinhardt of Princeton and Neil Turok of the Perimeter Institute independently proposed a related cyclic model based on string theory's colliding branes, membranes of spacetime colliding across an extra dimension and regenerating the universe with each impact. Roger Penrose, who shared the 2020 Nobel Prize in Physics for his work on black holes, developed yet another cyclic model called conformal cyclic cosmology, claiming to have found faint circular patterns in the cosmic microwave background, imprints he calls Hawking points, left by black holes evaporating in a previous cosmic era. Each of these models carries a similar and deeply disturbing implication. If the universe bounces or cycles, then its physical constants, the strength of gravity, the mass of the electron, the speed of light, need not be the values they are for any fundamental reason. They are simply the values that survived, or were drawn randomly from the wreckage of a previous universe that operated by entirely different rules. If this is not the first universe, what knowledge was lost in every collapse? And are we the first intelligence across all those countless rebirths to think to ask? Number 5. The fine-tuned universe. Beginning in the 1970s, physicists working on the fundamental constants of nature made a discovery that many of them found deeply uncomfortable. When they calculated what the universe would look like if its basic parameters were adjusted even slightly, the result in almost every case was a cosmos so hostile to complexity that stars could never form, atoms could never assemble, and life of any conceivable kind could never emerge. The universe, it turned out, appeared to be calibrated with extraordinary precision for the existence of everything in it. The cosmological constant, which governs the energy density of empty space and controls the rate at which the universe expands, is fine-tuned to approximately 1 part in 10 to the power of 120. Physicists describe this as possibly the most extreme fine-tuning problem in the history of science. UK astronomer royal Martin Rees catalogued 6 fundamental numbers in his 1999 book, Just 6 Numbers, demonstrating that if any one of them differed by even a small fraction, the universe would be either too simple to produce stars or too violent to allow them to survive long enough to forge the heavy elements life requires. The anthropic principle, formalized by physicist Brandon Carter at a symposium in Krakow in 1973, gave this puzzle a name without fully resolving it. The most striking historical example of fine-tuning comes from astronomer Fred Hoyle, who in approximately 1952 predicted the existence of a specific resonance energy level in the carbon-12 nucleus before it had ever been observed in a laboratory. His reasoning was not based on particle physics. It was based on the fact that carbon exists in abundance in the universe, and therefore carbon production must be possible, and therefore this energy level must exist, because without it, the nuclear reactions inside stars that produce carbon could not proceed. Physicist William Fowler subsequently confirmed the resonance experimentally. Hoyle later remarked that nothing had shaken his atheism as profoundly as this calculation. 3 competing explanations dominate the scientific literature. Either the constants were set intentionally by some form of intelligence, or we exist in a multiverse where an incomprehensible number of universes sample every possible combination of constants, and we inevitably find ourselves in one compatible with life. Or there is an undiscovered deeper physical law that forces these values, making fine-tuning an illusion rather than a miracle. The fine-tuning of the universe is either the most compelling argument ever made for a creator, or the most compelling argument ever made for the existence of infinite other universes, and science cannot yet tell us which. Number 4. The Great Filter. In August 1996, economist Robin Hanson at George Mason University published an online essay that asked one of the most consequential questions ever posed in scientific literature. The Fermi paradox had already established the disturbing silence of the cosmos, a universe 13.8 billion years old, containing hundreds of billions of galaxies each with hundreds of billions of stars, should by any statistical reckoning be teeming with civilizations. Yet we detect nothing. No signals, no megastructures, no evidence of any kind. Hanson's essay, revised in 1998, entitled "The Great Filter, Are We Almost Past It?", reframed that silence not as a mystery, but as a warning. Between the birth of a star system and the emergence of a spacefaring civilization, Hanson argued, something filters out almost everything. Some step in the process is so improbable that virtually no lineage successfully completes it, explaining the emptiness we observe. The central and disturbing question is where in the sequence this filter sits. If it lies behind us, we are extraordinarily lucky survivors, and the silence around us represents the norm for a brutal universe. If it lies ahead of us, the silence is a forecast. The cosmic graveyard of civilizations that never made it includes everyone who reached approximately the level of development we have now. The candidates for a passed filter include the initial emergence of life from chemistry, the extraordinarily improbable jump from simple prokaryotic cells to complex eukaryotic ones, a transition that took roughly 1.8 billion years on Earth, and the emergence of intelligence itself. Nick Bostrom of Oxford University made a famous and unsettling argument in 2008. Finding microbial life on Mars would be terrible news, not because of what it is, but because of what it implies. If life arose independently on two planets in the same solar system, the emergence of life is evidently easy, which means the filter almost certainly lies ahead in our future. The candidates for a future filter are grimly familiar: nuclear war, engineered pandemics, artificial intelligence that escapes human control, climate collapse sufficient to end technological civilization. Any one of them, combined with the statistical near certainty that thousands of civilizations have preceded us in this galaxy alone, suggests that something ends civilizations at approximately the developmental stage we have now reached. Every barren planet we find is good news. Every world with fossilized life is a caution. And every world with intelligent life, if we ever find one, may be the last warning we receive before we understand exactly where the filter has been waiting all along. Number 3. Dark matter, the invisible majority. In 1933, Swiss astronomer Fritz Zwicky at Caltech was calculating the mass of the Coma galaxy cluster using two independent methods. The first method measured how bright the cluster's stars appeared, inferring their mass from their luminosity. The second method measured how fast the individual galaxies were moving relative to each other, using the laws of gravity to calculate how much mass would be required to hold the cluster together at those velocities. The two answers were wildly, inexplicably different. The cluster was moving as if it contained roughly 400 times more mass than its visible stars could account for. Zwicky called the unseen substance dunkle Materie, dark matter. Nobody believed him. 4 decades later, astronomer Vera Rubin and physicist Kent Ford at the Carnegie Institution confirmed the problem from an entirely different direction. Mapping the rotation curves of spiral galaxies throughout the 1970s, they found that stars at the outer edges of galaxies were orbiting far too fast. Under Newtonian gravity, stars far from a galactic center should orbit slowly, as the outer planets of our solar system do. Instead, the rotation curves were flat, as if something invisible and massive were permeating every galaxy and extending far beyond its visible edge. The data was unambiguous. The explanation was not. Dark matter now constitutes approximately 27% of the total energy content of the universe, compared to just 5% for ordinary matter, the atoms, molecules, and particles that make up everything we have ever directly observed. The bullet cluster collision of 2006, cataloged as 1 E0657-558, provided the most direct evidence, as gravitational lensing revealed matter concentrated where no visible gas existed, precisely as dark matter predicts. The leading candidates for its identity include weakly interacting massive particles, known as WIMPs, axions, and sterile neutrinos. The LX Zeppelin experiment buried beneath the Black Hills of South Dakota, and earlier experiments including Xenon 1T and Panda X, have progressively searched deeper and deeper into the parameter space where WIMPs should theoretically live. They have found nothing, systematically eliminating the most favored models one by one. We have spent 90 years and billions of dollars building increasingly sensitive instruments to detect the majority constituent of the universe, and every search has returned empty. The matter that gives galaxies their structure, that shaped the cosmic web across billions of light years, that makes up more than a quarter of everything that exists, has never once revealed itself to any detector we have built. We have spent 90 years and billions of dollars searching for the majority of the universe and found nothing. which means either our detectors are too primitive, or our entire theory of what matter is needs to be rewritten from the ground up. Number 2, the hard problem of consciousness. In 1995, philosopher David Chalmers stood before a conference on the science of consciousness in Tucson, Arizona, and drew a line that has divided scientists and philosophers ever since. The easy problems of consciousness, he argued, explaining how the brain processes information, directs attention, and generates behavior, are not actually easy. They are just solvable in principle, given enough neuroscience and enough time. The genuinely hard problem is different in kind. It asks why there is something it feels like to be you. Why does the processing of visual information feel like seeing red, rather than simply being the processing of visual information with no inner experience attached? No physical explanation, however complete, appears to touch that question. Chalmers called this the hard problem of consciousness, and it has haunted science ever since. The standard scientific assumption has always been that consciousness is something the brain produces, an emergent property of sufficient neural complexity, the way wetness emerges from collections of water molecules. But the hard problem suggests this framing may be fundamentally mistaken. You can describe the neural correlates of the experience of seeing red in perfect detail, mapping every photon, every retinal cell, every signal along the optic nerve, every activation pattern in the visual cortex, and at no point in that description does the redness appear. The experience itself, the subjective quality, the feeling, seems to exist in a different category entirely from the physical processes that accompany it. A serious and growing body of philosophical and scientific work proposes that the solution may require rethinking the fundamental nature of matter itself. Panpsychism, the theory that consciousness is not produced by matter, but is instead a fundamental property of matter, the way mass or charge are fundamental, is now seriously defended by Chalmers, by philosopher Philip Goff at Cornell University, and by physicist Roger Penrose at Oxford. Giulio Tononi at the University of Wisconsin-Madison has developed integrated information theory, which assigns a mathematical measure called phi to any physical system and proposes that consciousness is identical to integrated information, meaning it exists to varying degrees in everything. Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff have proposed since the 1990s that consciousness arises from quantum processes in protein structures called microtubules within neurons, a framework called Orchestrated Objective Reduction, or ORC-OR. If any of these theories are correct, the implications cascade across every domain of human knowledge. Consciousness would not be an accident of biological complexity, a lucky byproduct of evolution on a single planet. It would be woven into the fabric of the universe itself, present at every scale, from the simplest physical interaction to the most complex neural network. The question of what we are would become inseparable from the question of what the universe is. If consciousness is a fundamental property of reality rather than something brains accidentally produce, then the cosmos has not been blindly assembling itself toward life. It has been experiencing itself all along, and every star, every particle, every quantum event has carried within it some faint and unknowable flicker of what it is like to exist. Number 1. The theory of everything. Albert Einstein published his general theory of relativity in 1915, reshaping humanity's understanding of gravity, space, and time. 17 years later, in 1928, he began the project that would consume the remaining 27 years of his life. A unified field theory, a single set of equations from which all the forces of nature would emerge as different expressions of one underlying reality. On the night of April 17, 1955, Einstein worked on his unification equations at Princeton Hospital. He died the following morning with those notes on his bedside table, the problem unsolved. Every physicist who has attempted it since has failed in the same way. The obstacle is not a lack of ingenuity. It is a structural incompatibility between the two most successful theories in the history of science. General relativity describes gravity and the large-scale geometry of space-time with breathtaking precision, and it has been confirmed by every experimental test ever devised. Quantum mechanics, refined through the 20th century into the standard model of particle physics, describes the three remaining fundamental forces: electromagnetism and the strong and weak nuclear forces, with equally extraordinary precision. The problem is that when you try to apply quantum mechanics to gravity, or general relativity to the quantum scale, both theories break down. They are each spectacularly right, and together, they are fundamentally incompatible. String theory, developed through collaborative work by physicists, including John Schwartz, Michael Green, and Edward Witten across the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, remains the most mathematically developed candidate for unification. It proposes that the fundamental constituents of reality are not point particles, but one-dimensional vibrating strings, and it requires 10 or 11 dimensions to be mathematically consistent. The landscape of possible string theory. Configurations numbers approximately 10 to the power of 500, which some physicists cite as evidence of its extraordinary flexibility, and others cite as evidence of its inability to predict anything specific. Loop quantum gravity, developed by Lee Smolin and Carlo Rovelli, offers a competing approach that quantizes space-time itself into discrete units without requiring extra dimensions. In 2020, Stephen Wolfram launched his Wolfram Physics project, proposing that a simple computational rule applied to an abstract hypergraph could generate all of space, time, and the laws of physics as emergent properties. None of these have been proven. The theory of everything does not yet exist, but if it were found, and found to be correct, the consequences would extend beyond any other discovery in human history. It would explain why the universe has exactly 4 fundamental forces. It would explain why the physical constants have the precise values they do, answering the fine-tuning problem, the Big Bounce question, the nature of dark matter, and possibly the origin of consciousness itself, all from a single unified framework. It would be the moment humanity reads the source code of reality. Every other mystery in this list sits one step down from the same question. What are the deepest rules governing everything that exists? And why do those rules take the form they do? The theory of everything would not merely be the greatest achievement in the history of physics. It would be the last achievement, the end of a search that began the first time a human being looked at the sky and asked why. We have never been closer to finding it. We have never understood more clearly how much we do not know. And the universe, for now, holds its final answer in a silence deeper than space itself. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.